So good morning, dear colleagues. The sitting is open. I have received separate requests for a vote in Parliament from the Left, S&D and Greens group, reaching the medium threshold on the decision of the LIBE committee to enter into negotiations on the following files: application of the safe third country concept and the establishment of a list of safe countries of origin at union level. The vote will be held today, and it will be preceded by one round of political group speakers. Concerning the other decisions by the LIBE and EMPL committees to enter interinstitutional negotiations pursuant to Rule 72, paragraph 1, announced at the opening of the session on Monday, 15 December, I have received no requests for a vote in Parliament by members or political groups reaching the medium threshold. Therefore, the LIBE and EMPL committees may start negotiations. The next item on the agenda is Council and Commission statements, preparation of the European Council meeting of the 18th and 19th December 2025, in particular the need to support Ukraine, transatlantic relations and the EU's strategic autonomy. I'd like to remind you that we continue with the new-ish format for this debate, so there will be no speakers list. And after the first round of speakers, members who receive time by their political groups or non-attached secretaries will be called to speak. So please keep an eye on the screen and please make your way to the lectern when your name appears as upcoming speaker. Normal rules for blue cards and catch the eye apply. So I start with the Council, Minister for European Affairs, Mario Berry.
President, honourable members, President of the Commission, tomorrow EU leaders will meet in Brussels for the December European Council. Among a range of important topics, the focus will be on two issues: Ukraine and EU's Multiannual Financial Framework for 2028 to 2034. This European Council will be preceded by the EU Western Balkan Summit to be held later today. As always, the European Council meeting will start with an exchange of views with the President of the European Parliament. After that, leaders are expected to hear from President Zelensky. Ukraine remains a top priority for the European Council. The latest developments once again highlight the need for urgent EU action. As you know, diplomatic efforts to end Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine are ongoing. In this context, leaders will discuss how best to strengthen Ukraine's negotiation position to achieve a just and lasting peace, and to continue defending Europe's interest. An important part of that needs to be increased pressure on Russia. Leaders will also come back to the pressing issue of Ukraine's financing needs for 2026 to 2027, including for its military and defense efforts. It is of crucial importance that a solution is found on this, and the Danish presidency has worked hard to coordinate efforts in the run-up to the European Council to ensure a positive outcome. Another important topic on the agenda is the next Multiannual Financial Framework. This European Council meeting will be an occasion to take stock of progress so far and to provide guidance for the next phase of negotiations. The Danish presidency has considerably advanced the preparatory work. This work must continue to enable an agreement by the end of 2026 on the next MFF and its financing. Keeping to this timetable is important for the EU to have the new funding programs in place right from the start of 2028. It will also demonstrate that the European Union is able to work in a timely and prudent way on the budgetary foundations for its action. Interlinked with both topics is the issue of ramping up Europe's defense readiness by 2030. Leaders will take stock of the implementation of the previous decisions on the European defense and security. Recent events show that Russia and Belarus have intensified their hybrid campaign in Europe. This reminds us that we need to accelerate efforts to all strands towards our defense readiness. Enlargement will also be on the European Council agenda. This is particularly important in the current geopolitical context. Through the merit-based approach, reform processes have a profoundly transformative effect in the candidate countries. Leaders are expected to hold a discussion on the way forward. Yesterday, we adopted presidency conclusion on enlargement, supported by 26 member states. Unfortunately, we were not able to reach council conclusion as one member country was blocking for this. Leaders will also discuss migration, as they take stock of progress made in this area. During the Danish presidency, we have prioritized tackling irregular migration and ensuring effective control of the EU's external borders, work that has now borne fruit. At last week's Justice and Home Affairs Council, we were able to establish general approaches on 3 legislative files: the regulations of safe country of origin and safe third country and returns. We are now ready for trialogue this week. We also managed to reach an agreement on the Council implementation decision establishing the first annual solidarity pool following long negotiations. This agreement comes only 6 months after the June European Council encouraged us to intensify work on these topics, and it is one example of how the Danish presidency has aimed to ensure strong and swift follow-up to the European Council this past semester. Over the past 6 months, the Danish presidency has worked for a strong and resolute European Union that takes responsibility for its own security and for strengthening its competitiveness. In this context, we welcome the leaders' planned discussion on the geo-economic situation and its implications for the EU competitiveness. Earlier this year, leaders addressed their internal dimension of increasing our competitiveness, notably through simplification. In this context, I want to highlight the agreement we reached with the European Parliament last week to simplify the directives on corporate sustainability reporting and corporate sustainability due diligence by reducing the reporting burden and limiting the trickle-down effect of obligations on smaller companies. And I am very happy that the agreement was voted through this Parliament yesterday. This is a good example of how we can take measures ourselves to improve our competitiveness. However, we also recognize that European competitiveness does not exist in a vacuum. It is important that we discuss the pressures and the opportunities that arise in a world marked by rising geo-economic competition. In their strategic discussion, leaders will touch on issues like trade diversification, strategic autonomy, and how the EU can best defend itself from external economic and political pressures. Leaders will return to the topic of competitiveness at their upcoming retreat on the 12th of February and at the March European Council. Last but not least, the situation in the Middle East will also be discussed by the leaders. The adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2803 offers an opportunity to advance towards peace. The European Union has a role to play in contributing to the full implementation of the ceasefire in Gaza and in ensuring that the path to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on the two-state solution remains viable. In closing, this European Council will focus on some of the most pressing issues of the day, taking crucial steps towards ensuring Europe's security and competitiveness in a volatile and uncertain world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. May I also take the opportunity to thank the Danish presidency for the cooperation we've had over the last 6 months as we start to prepare for the Cypriot presidency. Now I give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
President Metsola, dear Roberta, Minister Bjerre, honourable members. This week's European Council is about facing the reality of the moment, the reality of a world that has become dangerous and transactional, a world of wars, a world of predators. The reality of this world means we Europeans must defend ourselves and we must depend on ourselves. We have been living in this world for some time, even before the biggest wake-up call of all, that was Russia's illegal invasion in Ukraine in February 2022. Yesterday's peace is gone. We have no time to indulge in nostalgia. What matters is how we confront today. We cannot afford to let the world views of others define us. None of us should be shocked by what others say about Europe. But let me say this. It would not be the first time that assumptions about Europe were shown to be outdated. It would not be the first realization that the post-war world order is changing beyond recognition. The national security strategy is right to say, and I quote, Europe has been losing share of global GDP down from 25% in 1990 to 14% today. End of quote. But what is not written is that the figures for the United States are on the same path. The United States has been losing share of global GDP from 22% in 1990 down to 14% today. So this is not a story of an economy on one side of the Atlantic or the other. This is the story of the shift in the world economy. If you take China alone, their share of global GDP went up from 4% in 1990 to 20% today. And this is why the United States has been clear for some time about its shifting strategic interests and priorities as China rises. The point I am making is this strategy is not the cause of the disruption that Europe is facing in the world. It is a symptom of the reality of today's world. So our task at this week's summit is to show that we are focused on our own strategy and our own interests and our own priorities. And this is why I want to repeat from this very place where I said it in the State of the Union, this is Europe's independence moment. Ever since we started using this term, independence, many have been skeptical about what that entails. Is it even realistic? Well, just look at what we have already done. From defense to energy, we have made the impossible possible as part of our new reality. And we are ready to do more. Because in our independence, we make ourselves stronger. A stronger Europe is a stronger partner, not just to promote, but to guarantee a safer world. And let us look at the progress we have made. We are entering a new era. And that is Europe's energy independence from Russian fossil fuels. And this House has been a leader on this from day one on, and I thank you for that. Your efforts have paid off. Your efforts have paid off because thanks to RePower EU, Russian gas imports, so LNG and pipeline, are down from 45% at the beginning of the war to 13% today. Coal imports are down from 51% at the beginning of the war to 0. And crude oil from 26% at the beginning of the war to 2% today. All this means we are going to phase out Russian fossil fuels for good and forever. And just a few years ago, this was unthinkable. But we acted, and we earned our independence from Russia. This is not a coincidence. This is hard work that we've done together. And this is hard work that was driven by what makes us European, our sense of purpose, our union, our political will. We now have our template for the way forward, whether it be on critical raw materials with our Resource EU plan, or on diversification and strengthening supply chains through ambitious trade agreements from Latin America to the Indo-Pacific. Europe's era of independence must be unstoppable. And we have more work to do. We have to go further. We must move swiftly. And that is particularly important when it comes to security and defense. The bottom line is simple. Europe must be responsible for its own security. This is not longer an option. This is a must. And we know the threats that we face, and we will confront them. This means we need to be ready. We have to develop and deploy new capabilities so that we can fight a modern hybrid war. Here again, we are moving mountains. After decades of underinvestment, we are turning a corner. We're transforming our defense industrial base into one that can deliver cutting-edge technologies and fast mass production in the cauldron of war. This year, we have done more for defense than in the last decades. Over the last 10 years, we invested 8 billion euros in the defense fund. This year, we enabled up to 800 billion euros of investment till 2030. And we have seen how oversubscribed our SAFE program has been, with the demand from 19 member states, fast outstripping the 150 billion euros on the table, and member states are already asking for a new round of SAFE. And this shows our European commitment to our European security. And honourable members, this surge in defence is not only on defence, we all know it. It is about our freedom, it is about our prosperity, and it is about our independence. And there is no more important act of European defence than supporting Ukraine's defence. The next days will be a crucial step for securing this. It is up to us to choose how we fund Ukraine's fight. We know the urgency, it is acute, we all feel it, we all see it, because just as peace negotiations are stepping up, so is intensifying the Russian barrage of attacks. Now, the IMF and our estimates show that Ukraine's need for the years 26 and 27 are around about 137 billion euros. Europe should cover 2/3, that is 90 billion euros. And this is not just about numbers. This is about strengthening Ukraine's ability to secure a real peace, one that is just, one that is lasting, one that protects Ukraine and thus also protects Europe. And it is also about ramping up the cost of war for Russia. And this is why I proposed two different options for this upcoming European Council, one based on assets and one based on EU borrowing. And we will have to decide which way we want to take, which route we want to take. But one thing is very, very clear. We have to take the decision to fund Ukraine for the next 2 years in this European Council. And we have already done one very important step. Last week, we agreed on the sustained immobilization of Russian assets. And this is a decisive step that sends a very strong political message. It means that the Russian assets will remain immobilized until we decide otherwise, until Russia stops the war, and until Russia pays duly reparations to Ukraine for the damage that is done. And with the assets immobilized indefinitely, this is also about strengthening Ukraine's ability to secure a real peace, one that is just, one that is lasting, and one that protects Ukraine and Europe. Honourable members, we also have to agree this week on the topics that have been mentioned by Minister Bjerre. I want to focus on the topics I have mentioned here. We will speak a lot in this debate about the need of European independence, how we achieve it. And this European Council and the decision on Ukraine is a central part of this. But we must always remember why independence is so important in today's world. It is important because independence is ultimately about our freedom. The freedom to decide and to make laws for ourselves, the freedom to act however we want, to pursue our own interests and our own partnerships, the freedom to vote for whoever we want without being pressured or subjected to a torrent of manipulated information, the freedom to choose diversity, to choose democracy. But above all, it is about the freedom to live the way we want, and that is the European way of life. And our cultures and our traditions are so distinct and so central to our way of life, and this is what binds us together. And when we are united, we made the experience, then we are unstoppable. And I'm deeply proud of this. Our differences do not divide us. We celebrate our different cultures. They connect us as Europeans. And the pride we have in Europe is what connects us. So, as we look ahead, I urge you to be confident in what we can achieve in our quest to be a strong, independent Europe. Thank you, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much, President of the Commission. And now the first round of political group speakers, starting with the President of the EPP Group, Manfred Weber.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin Metsola, sehr geehrte
President Metsola, President Mrs. von der Leyen, representative of the Danish Presidency, colleagues, this is an important and historic week that we're approaching. And the first thing I have to say is about developments on Ukraine. I hope that on financing for Ukraine, this Council will not fail. It will be a historic failure if there were to be no outcome. And I would like to thank our Commission President for the alternative she's put forward. The EPP believes in the principle that those triggering this war should stump up also for the consequences. So this is the idea of using the Russian assets to finance the costs. And then Belgium has proposed that it should be fared between all Europeans. That's the preferred solution that should be worked on this week. Then we have what's happening in Berlin, discussions on curfew, maybe even lasting peace. And it's important that Europe play a leading role, that Europe is sitting at the table and there supports Zelensky, rooted in European solidarity. Now, this started years, decades ago. We saw the Ukrainians calling for democracy and wanting to lead their country towards Europe, which they've done. And then the occupation of Crimea initially with military power. Putin is afraid of democracy. And then in 2014, the Europeans, the Germans in particular, we pulled out all the stops, not only for appeasement, but all efforts towards appeasement have failed. Now, once the Berlin discussions come to an end, the ball lies in Moscow's court, and we'll see what happened. But no one, not even the populists on the left and the right, can claim that we haven't tried through democracy. We'll only win over Putin if we stand together and support Zelensky. The second important point is Mercosur this week. We're an exporting continent. We depend on trade, and China and our partners in the United States are becoming increasingly difficult as trading partners, which means that we need to look for new partners. 400 million people are linked with Mercosur, the biggest free trading area in the world. And so this is a huge opportunity, an anti-Trump agreement, if we could enter into that agreement. We need to support our farmers, and that's why we support also the safeguards. But I'd like to say clearly that obviously it's not the concerns about market developments we should be concerned about, but we should have opportunities to the fore, coming to the fore. Industry wants us to go down this path, and so safeguards, protection, fair competition, and all for Mercosur as well. It would be a historic decision, and an awful lot is at stake in this decision. Now, we're at the end of this year now, and our citizens are going into the new year with a lot of concerns. War in Europe, the question about democracy, many important issues. And therefore, it's important to stress that, yes, we are moving forward. Things are happening. We're saying far too little about successes. Now, with the Danish Council, we've made some huge progress with the omnibus as well, deforestation, the automotive package we were discussing yesterday. We are spending money for the future of our prosperity. And I would like to call on the financial questions of Europe, not only to discuss the figures, the net, the gross, but also the European value added, where Europe can do more. On climate protection, we agreed together on the 2040 aims. Housing, yes, we've got things moving there as well, which is going to strengthen Europe. And on defence, we've taken some historic decisions. And I think we can assure our citizens that Europe is delivering, is moving forward. We want to achieve solutions. And looking towards 2026, for us as the EPP, two things are important. Obviously, welfare, prosperity is important as well, but it doesn't create markets or a business case, and that means that we have to believe in our own internal market and invest there, strengthen it from a regulatory point of view, and believe in trade as well. And the second thing, colleagues, that we need to do is that Europe has been successful on many fronts, but in the discussions about Ukraine, we're seeing that the European architecture is no longer fit for purpose, that we are not ready to give our own answers. I said this last week as well. I was talking about the G3, Macron, Metz and Starmer. It's great, can help towards peace, but the meeting of the big three is not Europe. It's not Europe. And that's why we need structures which in the long term can ensure that that Europe is present at the negotiating table. And that's what we need to dedicate ourselves to in 2026. Happy Christmas to everybody.
Same to you. For the S&D group, its chair, Iracha Garcia Perez.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Donald Trump's new national security strategy is not a misunderstanding nor a jest. It is a statement, a hostile statement against the European Union. It describes us as adversaries, legitimizes the far right, and embraces a world governed by autocrats and unscrupulous multi-millionaires. There is a historic duty incumbent upon us to take Trump's national security strategy and turn it into a declaration of independence for the European Union. Allow me to address you, Mr. Weber. You cannot say that you champion the European project while you do deals with Trump's allies here in this House, with the fake patriots on the far right who seek to destroy Europe from within. Mr. Weber, when you ally yourself with extremists, you align yourself with Trump's values. Are those the values that the EPP defends? The values of a man who attacks media, attacks universities, threatens judges? There is no middle ground possible between European democracy and Trumpist authoritarianism. Let's be clear on that. And let me turn now to you, Mrs. von der Leyen. Flattery has failed. Appeasement has failed. European history is clear on this. Appeasing autocrats never brings peace, only more conflict. We saw yesterday how Trump's North American administration threatened the European Union for legislating to protect the rights of European citizens against big tech. And here I did not hear a single word about that in this debate. Silence is not the answer. Let us be clear. We in the Socialists and Democrats will be clear. We are defending European freedom, and we have the freedom to legislate in the face of those who seek to attack us. Now, tomorrow's Council faces a historic responsibility. The European Union must use the 210 billion euros of Russian frozen assets for a loan. It's a matter of justice and security. The Socialists and Democrats, the S&D group, will move forward with a fast-track solution here. Putin cannot enjoy impunity in the face of massacres in Bucha, Kramatorsk and Mariupol, nor the kidnapping of 20,000 Ukrainian children. Those who destroy, who wreak havoc, must pay the price. If we do not stop Putin in Ukraine, then our own security will be at stake. The only response to Trump and Putin is to turn away from flattery and embrace strategic autonomy. We need defence autonomy through EDIP and SAFE. We need energy autonomy. We need an immediate proposal to ban Russian oil. We need trade autonomy. We must immediately approve the Mercosur trade agreement. We need technological autonomy, and we must defend our legislation, such as the Digital Services Act. Mrs. von der Leyen, strategic autonomy will not be possible without a strong multiannual financial framework. Cuts will only benefit the enemies of Europe. Now, we do not decide today merely on a political position. We're deciding on the type of Europe we are and we want to be, a Europe of fear, submission, or will we build a Europe of courage, justice and autonomy? There are those who wish Europe to be weak and divided. Let us build a strong, sovereign Europe, one that is true to its values. That is the type of Europe at stake, the type of Europe that we will champion.
Now I give the floor on behalf of the PFV group to Harald Wilimski.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to wish you a very pleasant, festive time. So this is something which, of course, transcends our political parties. And I think this is the spirit that should imbue our policy making, our politics. And really, we should, at this time of the year, be promoting peace and not war. And Mr. Weber, yes, we can celebrate Easter, but right now let's celebrate Christmas. And I think it's important to use this opportunity to really try and find the right path. But let me pick up on what previous speakers said. Ms. von der Leyen and Mr. Weber talked about a war, but in actual fact, we have to recognize this as being part of a political process and for all of us to strive for peace. And that is why we have to think of the 350,000 victims of this senseless war. We've got thousands who are in prison. We've got children who have lost their parents. We've got a whole host of tragic situations. And so that is why, well, fine, yes, we can condemn Putin for what he has done. We've got all these successive packages of sanctions which have come to nothing. And the path that we have pursued so far has not brought us an inch further forward. And so that is why it is high time that we take a decision to go down a different road. And that is why I welcome the Council's proposal that we vote in favour of peace. Yes, I mean, it's fine. We want to be strong. We want to be more powerful. You know, I will heed all of those calls. Yes, of course, you know, we've got Rheinmetall and BlackRock and all the others who are benefiting from the war. And we've got voices here, Viktor Orban, for example, who has been pleading for peace for a long time. We've got the President of the Czech Republic again. He is pushing for peace. We've got Robert Fico again. Let's thank him. He too has been advocating for peace, as well as the future Chancellor of Austria, Herbert Kickl, again, who has been calling for peace. And we are going to strengthen that alliance of the voices who are calling for peace. So at the end of my speech, let me say you that peace is the only right way forward. War can never, ever be any kind of a solution. And so I'm expecting more from Europe. More from Europe. We should be raising our voices in favour of peace, putting an end to this war and not fanning the flames any longer. Apart from all that, Merry Christmas.
On behalf of the ECR group, to its co-chair, Nicola Procaccini. Prego.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. President von der Leyen. Well, we're approaching this European Council at a crucial juncture. For Ukraine, the ECR group welcomes the shared objective of a fair and lasting peace. It's crucial for Europe to work together with the United States of America. There's no point rushing ahead alone. What we have to do is to build a joint strategy which will guarantee security for Ukraine and stability in terms of Euro-Atlantic relations. Peace is built through the power of deterrence and the clear-sightedness of diplomacy. On defence, our position is clear. We need to do more, but we need to do better. Better European defence isn't born from pooling powers, but rather by coordinating the efforts of our countries, particularly on military spending. And then there's internal defence, or the security of our borders to ensure that illegal immigration does not become a social bomb, as all too often we see in our towns and cities. Today we'll be voting to render returns of irregular migrants more straightforward, and we need that in order to staunch the criminal business of trafficking in human beings. But it's also necessary in order to distinguish those who have the right to asylum because their lives are at risk or because they will be of use to help European economic growth from those who do not actually enjoy that right. This is neither racism nor xenophobia, of which you have accused us in past years, but it's simply common sense. We Conservatives will never forget that security is the fundamental right that allows us to enjoy all of our other civil rights. It's about defending the defenceless, those people who don't live in low traffic zones, who go home at night from work, who take their children to the closest public park because they can't afford to go to Disneyland. A wise British conservative, Benjamin Disraeli, was saying that ensuring social security for people is the first duty of any leader, and that's what the Conservatives intend to do in Europe today as well.
New Europe Group, Valérie Ayer.
Thank you, President. President, Minister. President, the upcoming European summit will be decisive for Europe, for Ukraine, and for the credibility of Europe. We need to resolve the issue of frozen assets. For months, we've asked the Council to make progress here. I'd like to welcome the work done by the Commission here, the legal work done, and I'd like to welcome the work done by Antonio Costa, the President of Council, and the Danish Presidency. I would like to warmly thank you for the work you've done over the past 6 months and the progress you've made. Let me turn to Belgium. Yes, we need to offer guarantees, ensure a European approach, but do not tremble and hesitate. Do not refuse to use the 210 billion in frozen assets for Ukraine. Our credibility is at stake. And above all, we must help Ukraine at this decisive juncture. If Ukraine falls, if we do not impose sufficient security safeguards, then our own security will be under threat. Our independence will be in danger. That must be at the heart of our dealings with other powers. In particular, our transatlantic relationship. The new US national security strategy has made this clear. We have a problem with Donald Trump. We have a problem because we have rules that protect our economic model, because we demand that Musk respects our laws, because we are preventing Putin and the White House from wiping out Ukrainian sovereignty. We have 27 countries that have come together to work together. We need to speak with the US on an equal footing. President, appeasing Trump has not worked. We need to leverage our power. That is what the Americans have set out clearly in their national security strategy. They are looking to decimate our sovereignty, and they're doing so with the help of the far right here in Europe. They are looking to destroy the European Union, everything that we have achieved. Let me be firm. Our strategic autonomy is no longer a choice. It is a necessity. We need it to ensure our independence. Honourable members, in 1776, the US broke from the British colonial power and declared their independence. Now, we're not looking to destroy our transatlantic relationship, but we are not going to be mere vassals. At the next European summit, we need to declare European independence. We need to implement the Draghi and Letter reports to bolster our competitiveness. We need a more ambitious multiannual financial framework based on own resources. We need true European defence. We need trade relations. We need to diversify supply chains. We need to defend our democracy against all threats, including internal threats. We need to modernise our institutions, strengthen European governance, ensure that we can respond in times of crisis. We can waste not a single moment. This is not about Renew against another political group. It is about Europe coming together to stave off threats. The current US administration will not last forever. Others will replace it, but the problem will remain the same. We have a date with history. Let us declare our independence, European independence. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Ayer. And now the co-president of the Greens Group, Bas Eickhout.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam President and Minister. A divided Europe is the biggest gift you can give Putin and Trump. And this Council is a moment of truth after the US national security strategy, where people are saying that this is a wake-up call for Europe. A wake-up call? The wake-up call was on the 14th of February, when G.D. Vance was exactly playing out what is now in the national security strategy. So this is not a wake-up call, though not the first time. We have been woken up. How many times do we need before Europe really wakes up? The US strategy is clear. It's the same like Putin's. It wants to divide Europe. It wants to weaken Europe. It is against our liberal democracies. We need to stand up and need to fight for a European sovereignty. And that means the Council needs to deliver. On Ukraine first. We need to use the Russian frozen assets. And we demand a solution and a deal in the Council tomorrow. Get it done, show solidarity, and help rebuild Ukraine. But we also need serious security guarantees for Ukraine. And any long-lasting peace of Ukraine will only be there if Ukraine has a future within Europe. But we need to discuss our relation with the United States as well. Madam President, you said we need our own strategy. Well, since the February 14th, we only made ourselves more dependent of the United States. Yes, we put away our dependency of Russian gas, but we exchanged it for dependency of American gas. That is the wrong direction after the February 14th, and that needs to change. When is Europe finally going to learn? We need a strong, united, sovereign Europe. A Europe that fights for our freedom of speech, and not a speech being determined by algorithms designed by US tech autocrats. Truly implement the Digital Services Act. Our citizens deserve real free speech and needs protection from the US tech bros. But also economically, we need to be strong. It makes you think, dear EPP, when the American ambassador is applauding what you are doing with the due diligence law. That is an American agenda, an American deregulation agenda that the EPP is providing to. Be proud of that. You are serving the Trumpist agenda. And also yesterday, also sorry to say, Madam President, what you did yesterday on the car regulation proposal, it's the best Christmas gift you can give China. You are throwing the European car industry under the bus. You said the future is electric, and you are right. But now you are casting doubt for our own car industry, and that's the best gift for China. The future is electric, and the only choice is, will we be part of it, or will we just import future cars? That's the choice. So therefore, Madam President, rethink your omnibus agenda, because it is a deregulation Trumpist agenda. Last point for the EPP. You promised during the elections to only work with those who are being pro-Europe, pro-Ukraine, pro-democracy. Well, you've heard the speeches of your new friends. Rethink under your Christmas tree, and not during Easter, but Christmas. Thank you.
Now, I give the floor to the co-president of the Left Group, Martin Schödewan.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, Madam President. Finally, after 4 years of the Russian war against Ukraine, it seems that diplomacy is nigh. The decisions being taken in these days are going to shape the future of our continent for many years to come. Ukraine needs our support in this. Russia must and should pay reparations, but the path you're proposing for that, Ms. von der Leyen, is highly risky. And I don't understand why the risks aren't being discussed here, because unlike with the interests on frozen Russian assets and the assets of oligarchs involved in the war, many member states, the European Central Bank, the IMF, are warning against using Russian states' assets. Why don't we talk about civil reconstruction bonds, which would be given as credit to Ukraine and then could be paid back with Russian reparations? That would be legally clean and would help people in Ukraine. And we also want a haircut, long called for by the left, and security guarantees, which are not being discussed now. This all has to be part and parcel of a European security architecture. And logically, that requires the agreement of both parties to the conflict and, if possible, a mandate from the UN. Obviously, war and peace on European soil are not being negotiated in Brussels and Berlin right now, but rather decided in Washington and Moscow. And your awful references to a transatlantic friendship that has long become a toxic relationship for the EU has produced only anger and made people cringe. Blackmail, humiliation, gaslighting. You say yes to all of this that the White House throws at you. And we need progressive majorities and politicians whose knees don't tremble when Washington calls. The aim has to be strategic independence of the EU. That requires gutsy investment in jobs, industry, energy, the digital sector, and obviously, of course, also in security. But Ms. von der Leyen, your proposal for the EU budget doesn't stand up to that. Once again, you're afraid of honestly taxing the uber-rich and big tech, whilst you are making generous cuts to schools, kindergartens, and support for social bodies. Through your policies, the EU internationally not only has no voice, but inequality is increasing. And this is not the way to go about either peace or democracy. Thank you.
SN Group, Tomasz Frolich.
Frau von der Leyen.
Mrs. von der Leyen, you're making Europe a laughingstock. You stand for corruption, censure, green deindustrialization, and geopolitical insignificance. Now, you react in horror to Trump's peace plan. Where's your peace plan? And you have torpedoed Orban's plan, and now you're starting to come on board. Why not sooner? You could have spared Ukraine, as well as all of us, a great deal, including 3 years of recession. And we've got billions being funneled to a corrupt elite in Ukraine, and you have got 19 sanctions package which do more harm to us than to Russia. That's not a peace plan. That is sheer stupidity. We've got very poor relations with the US, poor relations to China, and poor relations with Russia, declining influence worldwide. And that's no way to conduct a foreign policy. So yes, of course we need strategic autonomy. We need our own industry, our own sovereignty, and we need realism, not moralism. We need smart diplomacy, and we don't need infantile feminists in suits. So we need to make Europe great again. That is what we need to do. Without you, please resign.
House Sherba, 1.5 minutes.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam President, colleagues, Europe should be grateful. Yes, Europe should be grateful because after the publication of the US security strategy, we know where we are. It is there, black on white. The basic goal in every scenario is to build the strength of the EU. The most important thing now is building the European pillar of the NATO, but we must also be prepared for even greater, even more decisive support for Ukraine, which is why the declaration of the Commission President is so important. We need to use the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank for Ukraine and for EU security. This is our obligation, and we should deliver on it. We should also support, integrate, and make more cohesive the defense industry so that we can use effectively all the funds that we have implemented this year. We need to defend the European sky, we need to defend the European institutions and the European society and build its resilience. But I want to be clear, expectations are rising. Prime Minister Tusk is saying that clearly, and the leaders of the eastern flank are also saying that. We need a new edition of SAFE because the needs are enormous and we want to respond constructively. Thank you.
And now Yannis Maniatis, 1 minute.
Madam President, finally we need to make European strategic autonomy something concrete. We're seeing threats, and we need to invest. We need to strengthen our position in critical areas. And if people didn't believe the publication of the new strategy from the United States shows that we can no longer depend on automatic reactions from the past. The alarm has been sounded and we must all listen to it. We have to stop believing that President Trump means what he says. But transatlantic alliance is still important, but it needs to be built on the basis of mutual respect, on the basis of our joint values. And we can see no interventions in our own democracy. The only solution, therefore, is a strong, autonomous Europe, able to stand on its own feet in the new geopolitical environment which is emerging.
Please stick to your speaking time so that we have the possibility also to use the blue cards for a more lively debate. The next speaker is Mrs. Mieke Andriessen.
Voorzitter.
President, the US government last week published its national security strategy. It offered a stark strategic warning for Europe. The greatest threat facing our continent, as President Trump quite rightly pointed out, is not from beyond our borders, but from within, civilizational erasure. President, let's be honest, this warning does not come from thin air. Mass migration threatens European identity. Our Judeo-Christian European civilization is crumbling under the pressure of mass influx from, in particular, Islamist countries. The US Vice President at the Munich Security Conference this year warned that mass immigration is the greatest strategic threat and challenge facing Europe. That is what our citizens see every day in their cities and towns, which bear more resemblance to North Africa and the Middle East than Europe. That is the strategic challenge of our time. But the EU and NATO would appear oblivious. President, we can still correct the course, but we must take an honest look in the mirror. Self-reflection does not make a civilization weak. Refusal to do so does. We need to defend our civilization. That is what our citizens expect of us. And it is a good thing that America has reminded us of that duty. Thank you.
Patrick Jaki, for 2 minutes.
Dziękuję, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, what about Russia? Russia has never kept its promise, has never kept to an agreement, and it never will. We need to speak to Russia with only language it can understand, with strength, with force. We need to confiscate all its assets immediately and spend those assets to fund the war so that Russia gets what's coming to it. But if you say that the US is dividing Europe, we need to ask the question, does the US divide us or only use the divided and weak Europe that you are responsible for? You, over 20 years of your government, have reduced the EU share of the global GDP by a half. You decreased our competitiveness, you paid to Russia, you introduced all those migrants. Instead of integration, you enforce an Orwellian policy, you destroyed innovativeness in business, you pursue censorship, and again you want to waste EU citizens' money for what's the most necessary, abortion on demand. EU, if it had been different, would deter Russia and the US. It was supposed to be the world's greatest free trade zone, and because of you, instead it started measuring CO2, spreading leftist ideology, penalizing conservative countries, or regulating all that's to be regulated. We need less regulation, more freedom to business, to people. We need more freedom of speech and less terror. Now you are pushing Europe to destroy its own agriculture. You made a laughingstock of the old continent, and now you want even more power because you say you know how to run things. Over 20 years, you showed that you do not know how to run things, and the US is only making use of the weakness that you caused. Europe can be made great again, but not with you.
Billy Kelleher.
Tomorrow's European Council Summit is a vital opportunity for the EU to take a united and unequivocal response to President Trump's national security strategy. Europe cannot underestimate the gravity of this strategy and that it signifies a seismic shift in norms of geopolitics. For centuries, relations between our countries have been underpinned by clear principles: sovereignty and non-intervention, reciprocity and respect. I fear that the national security strategy threatens all three. Trump has stated that Europe needs to correct its course trajectory and that America would cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory within the European Union. This is exactly the approach we've come to expect from our adversaries, not our allies. Russia and China have been systematically trying to cultivate resistance and undermine our democracies for the last decade through misinformation, disinformation online. Must we now fend off those threats from the West? As this week's summit, the members must decide on a robust response to the US strategy and Europe's approach going forward. As a priority, member states must reiterate our core values and stress that we will not waver. They must challenge Trump's characterization of these as elite-driven, anti-democratic restrictions on core liberties in Europe. Not least, the Commission and Member States must commit to implementing and applying the Digital Services Act and our rules on media pluralism, transparency without favour or exception, and we need to accelerate the work on the Democracy Shield. Only Europe can decide how to protect its citizens and how to regulate businesses operating here, and we should not be told how to do it by anybody else. All that being said, we must not forget that the EU-US relationship is a valuable one based on a long shared history. We have stood arm in arm during some of the darkest times for this continent and for theirs. It is in this relationship that we should work to rebuild and protect it. That is why I'm calling on the EU, Member States, the Commission, to organise a bilateral summit in the US to return the relationship between the EU and the United States of America to one of positivity, mutual respect and understanding, and above all, decency.
The next speaker is Diana Riba Iginer.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. Support for Ukraine is an issue of European security and defence of international law. There should be no doubt about that. But this war has revealed an uncomfortable reality. The United States are no longer a reliable, predictable partner, and that's confirmed by its new national security strategy, where the EU looks more like a threat than an ally. And in the same strategy, the European extreme right is seen, the so-called patriotic parties is seen as a Trojan horse, which could weaken the European project from inside. So let me say that the response from the Commission is not correct. It mixes up strategic sovereignty with massive rearmaments, coming back to a vision of security that belongs to the 20th century. Yes, Europe needs its own defence and security policy based on our own interest, and that's why we need to reconsider structures such as NATO. But sovereignty is not only military, it's also to do with food, it's digital, and it's industrial. Thank you.
Tenga, 1 minute and 30.
Thank you, President. The European Commission has just invented a new concept, selective independence. We will break off ties with Russia, no gas from Russia, but we will increase our reliance on the US. This will increase production costs for the manufacturing industry and weaken Europe. So we have selective indignation when it comes to foreign interference. We point the finger at Russia, Belarus and others. But what about an Israeli strategy to influence courts and cabinets around Europe? We read the US national security strategy and see that the US will rely try on the far right to redefine Europe, and yet we see the EPP voting with the far right, and yet you are not criticising the US. You say that you want to defend our way of life, but your economic and social measures are sapping the lifeblood out of our economies. You're not defending our way of life. You are decimating it. What about military investment? What are you doing? Are you trying to keep up with the US, engage in war around the world? Are you jealous that you can't bomb Venezuela or Iraq? What does Europe need? Well, it's quite clear we need to diversify our diplomatic relations. We need a sea change. We need to behave very differently to the US in this world. Thank you.
Is Hans Neuhoff.
Colleagues, the US's national security strategy shows that we are going to have to reorder our international relationships. The objective of the US is now to achieve strategic parity with other great powers. The consequence of that is that Europe in future will have to take more responsibility for its own security. Accordingly, it is not in Europe's interest to transform Ukraine into a wholesale frontline state to an iron porcupine on Russia's border. Let's not forget that the Russian military have a lead in terms of critical weapons systems of at least 20 years over us. And indeed, the head of NATO's intelligence service at the beginning of the year declared that he had no indication that Russia would attempt to attack an EU member state after the Ukraine war. So let's stop telling tales, intimidating people, and embark on a course of serious and constructive dialogue, and that includes with the Russian Federation.
Is Michael von Schulenburg. Sorry, this is not possible. Then you can ask a blue card, and if there is no blue card, no debate in this way. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Michael von der Schulenburg.
Dankeschön.
Thank you. President, Minister, now when the Council meets tomorrow, it should not be looking at the question of Russian assets, but rather a total new direction for our strategy on Ukraine, because with the policy followed thus far, we're running into a dead end with appalling consequences for our citizens. A militarization policy, weapon supplies, preparation for war, whilst refusing to discuss with Russia, will lead to a collapse of the economy and undermine our democracy. The decision to be taken by Council tomorrow could also lead Europe into a financial crisis. And with that strategy, we certainly would not be helping Ukraine. We need to put on the emergency brake. Neither the Council nor the Commission are in a position to change strategy, where you, the legitimate representatives of Europe, can find a way. It's up to you to find the way out of this crisis for Europe. Thank you.
Madam President, para quem olha o mundo como jogo de soma zero,
President, there are those who see the world as their playground. Now, Europe does not have a capital market, a banking union. So really, it's not a matter of opposing our allies, but looking to see what action we can take. What does it mean to be European? Well,
is to come from the smallest member state and to represent all the parliament, like our president does. Is to be a German and held the Netanyahu government accountable, like the president of the Commission did. To be an European is to do the opposite of what everyone is expecting, but what everyone knows must be done. Is to be a cohesion country and to have competitivity as a priority. To be an European is to defend a border even when we're not sharing it. Is to defend free elections even when we're not voting. Is to defend a just peace even when we're not in the fighting. To be an European is to do the right thing when no one else will. In 2026, may we be more European. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nicola Zingaretti.
L'autonomia strategica.
Europe's strategic autonomy is absolutely essential, but let's put an end to hypocrisy. We need unity. We need shared investment policies. And thanks to the European Union, for decades now, we have guaranteed peace and prosperity as well as solidarity for our citizens. And this has been within a transatlantic alliance in which we have had sovereignty. That's all up for discussion. We now need a more integrated and federal Europe to face up to the future. So I call on you to beef up community policies, have courage, have faith, and that stands in opposition to the right-wing nationalists who have proposed an entirely inadequate budget. We must try to face up to the fear and selfishness which have led us on the road towards war. That is why we need a united, federal and strong Europe. That Europe is possible. That's the Europe we want, and we will continue to fight for it.
Card from Mrs. Jukneviciene, EPP Jukneviciene.
I don't hear.
I appreciate your thoughts on unity in the European Union, but I have to respond to the emotional accusations on EPP of the socialist leader Iracha Garcia regarding the votes here. But what do you do, socialists, when your member, the Social Democrats in Lithuania, together with their anti-Semitic partners from the far right, are destroying the independence of the national broadcaster and want to strangle free speech? Journalists and thousands of people are protesting in Vilnius streets. Where is your party voice?
Well, look, we defend a Europe of freedom, Rachidi de Gasperi from Adenauer, Spinelli, Delors, Romano Prodi, and it's you have allied yourselves with the nationalist right, and you are betraying your own inheritance. You need to change course. You need to respect what has remained in the European Parliament of the values of the founding fathers of Europe.
Do you want an additional question? No. Then the next speaker is Tamás Deutsch.
Idézet következik.
I am going to start with a quote. Our European strategy in the name of transatlantic alliance copied the pro-war strategy of America, but President Trump, following his victory, is not going to wait. He's going to be ready as a peacemaker. I am sure that in the case of a probable outcome of a Trump win, the financial relations between the US and EU are going to change when it comes to support to Ukraine. End of quote. These lines come from Mr. Viktor Orban a year and a half ago. Following his peace mission, he wrote to the President of the European Council. Had European decision makers listened, then we could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives which were lost in the hell of war, and the EU would not have had to spend 200 billion euros in the war in Ukraine. So let's put things in place. Brussels still wants to continue the war in Ukraine, and the pro-war craze has shifted a gear in Brussels. But Europeans want peace, and the pro-peace position of Hungary means that we do not support the idea of spending frozen Russian assets in this way. This would have an incredible outcome, and we will never agree to a common European spending, to more spending to Ukraine.
Speaker is Asita Kanko.
Dear colleagues, the only Russian assets existing in Belgium are sitting at Euroclear, not in the office of the Prime Minister. Belgium has been and remains a steadfast supporter of Ukraine. I deeply regret that last week Belgium was singled out for raising legitimate legal and financial concerns about the EU plan to use frozen Russian central bank assets parked at Euroclear to support Ukraine. Why legitimate questions? Because there is no such thing as free money. There is always a risk, and nobody thought about who will pay. Belgium was asked to carry all the weight alone, to bear as one member state and its taxpayers a disproportionate share of the legal and financial risk. How is that fair and realistic? As a MEP, as a democratically elected member of this parliament, it must be said clearly, blackmail and threats of isolation like last week are not path to a stronger Europe. No member state should ever be treated as a vessel. Prime Minister Bart de Wever has shown courage by standing with Ukraine and by standing at the same time for Belgian citizens. And he is right to insist that European solidarity cannot mean reckless exposure for one member state. I fully support him.
The next speaker is Gerben-Jan Gerbrandy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner, Minister, dear colleagues. After the Munich Security Conference and the grilling of President Zelensky in the Oval Office, it's now, with the publication of the National Security Strategy, more than clear. Europe is on its own and should act accordingly, institutionally, economically, and on security. And this week in Berlin, a selection of European leaders showed that unity and urgent action is needed, including the UK and Norway. But this now must be translated to the European Council. And let's start by supporting Ukraine with agreeing on the frozen Russian assets. This issue has been discussed on European Council level 15 times at least since the start of the war. And this European Council cannot come to an end without a final decision. And I ask you, ensure us that you will not conclude the meeting without an agreement on a proper Ukraine reparation loan. And secondly, this unity and urgency should also be shown regarding our economic and societal strength. Europe is by far the best place in the world to live. Nowhere one can find our unique level of individual freedom, democracy, protection, and well-being. Let us be proud and build upon it. Today's hostile world forces us to use our strength more rigorously. And a no-brainer is cutting rules. And no, the biggest problem are not European rules, but national protective rules, the biggest barriers currently in place. The IMF and the European Investment Bank estimate the costs of these additional national rules are equivalent to 45% tariffs on goods and even more than 100% on services. How can we stand up against China and the US and many others if we keep fighting each other? So put this prominently on the agenda of the European Council, stop national protectionism within the EU and start working towards European strength. Thank you.
Rednerin ist Angelika
Niebler. Thank you, President, Commissioner, honourable members. The upcoming summit will be a historic one. Can we in the European Union take action? Will we shoulder our historic responsibility? That is what is at stake. I appeal to heads of state and government to assume their responsibilities for the European endeavour and not think in national terms. Mr. Gerbrandy made that point. So what does this mean? We need to ensure financing for Ukraine. Our security in general is at stake. As well as the security of Ukraine, we need a green light for Mercosur with the appropriate safeguards for our farmers. So what does this mean? We need to be open-minded when it comes to structural changes to the European architecture. Our party leader, Manfred Weber, mentioned that earlier. If we continue down the current path with unanimity alone in the Council on foreign affairs, how will we manage in coming years? So the 2026 period really needs to be one that sees structural change. In 2016, we saw a referendum in the United Kingdom. We saw how traumatic aftermath, and we talked about change in the European Union, but nothing happened, despite the fact that we in the European Parliament called for a convention to be established to address urgent issues for Europe's future. Nothing has happened since then, and so next year, let's tackle this challenge together. And in the meantime, Merry Christmas, very Happy New Year, and I hope that we embrace that new year in a European spirit.
The next speaker is Javier Moreno Sanchez.
Gracias, Presidenta. Querido Comisario.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, Minister, let's be clear that in the Kremlin and the White House and other allies, they're not happy with the success of the model of well-being, peace and democracy that we have in the EU. They want to impose the law of the jungle, and that means that we have to depend on ourselves, our values, affirming them together, but particularly showing political will. We have to continue to provide logistic support to Ukraine and use frozen Russian assets to rebuild the country. At the same time, we need to move towards energy autonomy and strengthen our own security. We have to strengthen our competitiveness based on the a fair digital and ecological transition. We have to diversify our trade relations with reliable partners. The agreement with Mercosur is therefore essential, but none of this will be possible if we didn't have an ambitious MFF which will allow territorial and social cohesion, which aims at Europe, and it helps, really, we can have to stand up together, and then no one can threaten us. Merry Christmas to everyone.
Dear colleagues, thank you. Something extraordinary is happening, and it's not the applause. The new U.S. national security strategy states it plainly. Certainty is over. Alliances are no more a given. I am a transatlanticist, but transatlanticism doesn't mean blindness. When rhetoric across the Atlantic turns against the European Union, we must act, invest in our own capacities, and to build our new decision-making bodies. The times when Orban or Mr. Deutsch determines how fast we decide is over. The times when Mr. Fico decides how much we act is over. The times when Putin determines how fast we act is over. We need new solutions, making decision-making easier. Not sometime, but now. I propose introducing a European Security Council that would decide fast about our existential questions. And now, very briefly to Ukraine, there's only one security guarantee for Ukraine which is effective. And it's not the gloomy Article 5, it's Article 42 of our treaty. That's why EU membership now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Irene Montero.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Ms. von der Leyen, well, she isn't here, but someone's in her place. Packages of sanctions against Russia, yes. How many against Israel? 0. So, you know, the genocide is ongoing and no support for sanctions. Same of Gaza. And you just support the bombing of any country as you wish. I mean, exactly how many packages of sanctions has Europe applied against the US? Again, 0. US is bombing ships in the Caribbean and is supporting this blockade against Venezuela. So, you know, sanctions against the US? Well, none at all. Of course, we've seen manipulation of elections in European countries, and we only have one US ambassador in European territory who has called out that interference in our elections, and we are talking about upping military spending at the behest of Donald Trump. But our sons and daughters are going to be embroiled in US-driven wars. We believe that security equals a welfare state.
Next speaker is Reinhold Lopatka. Bitte.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
honourable members, this week is a decisive turning point at the European Council. The Council must demonstrate that the European Union can act with resolve and help Ukraine. Member States must agree on reliable support and financing for Ukraine. We need Western security guarantees to guarantee the security of this large European country. Now, Russia is refusing to pay reparations, so we must do everything within our power to ensure that Russian frozen assets are used to rebuild Ukraine. And one final message to all those here in this chamber and beyond this House, those that predict the end of the European Union or express their doubts, let me tell you that we are not a failing collection of countries led by weak leaders. Quite the opposite. We will prove that the European Union will continue grow in future, will see future enlargements. We will do everything within our power to drive forward this project. We need to recognise the problems facing us, but we also need to embrace our future, and our future lies with cooperation within the European Union. There is no alternative.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Victor Negrescu.
Dear colleagues, let us be clear. The December European Council is about the direction of the European Union, about whether we are ready to act or whether we continue to react. The Union needs clear decisions to strengthen its own security, its strategic autonomy, and its ability to protect its economic and political interests. We need clear security guarantees, especially for the eastern flank. In a context of intense geo-economic competition, Europe must reinforce its industrial base, its supply chains, and its defense readiness through real investment, not just statements. The future EU budget is the central test. The next Multiannual Financial Framework must be a budget for action. Stronger support for competitiveness, for skills, infrastructure, security and cohesion. Without adequate resources, Europe's ambitions remain empty promises. This European Council must send a clear signal. The European Union knows what it wants, is ready to defend its future and delivers concrete benefits for its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Anna Bröker.
Szanowni Państwo, umowa...
Dear colleagues, the EU-Mercosur agreement is an example of the Commission's trade policy that is disjointed with EU interests. This is why the Council should take a look at how the Commission is performing its mandate, because what we are seeing now is a diktat. The Commission is breaching and going in opposition to all its values. It sacrifices EU farmers who have to comply with ever stricter norms for environmental protection and animal well-being, and they are forced to compete with exports from outside of the EU that do not have to comply. And this is a blatant, unfair competition. The Commission is trying to circumvent the opposition of member states and reduce the role of national parliaments, which is why we have requested a check of compliance with the treaties. And the fact that the President is in a hurry is not an excuse. We have worked on it for years. Now we are trying to push this through. This undermines food security and shows the Commission's hypocrisy, which on the one hand talks about climate protection and on the other supports its degradation outside of the EU. Why are you thwarting our economy with your climate ideas, whereas you support opposite directions in other countries. You are undermining the sovereignty of national states. Now,
Programul de reînarmare a Uniunii Europene, precum și înghețarea pe termen nedefinit a activelor rusești, au fost întemeiate pe articolul 122 din tratat. Utilizabil doar pentru situații de extremă urgență, acest text nu poate fi folosit pentru ocolirea Parlamentului. De aceea, o acțiune...
That's why action to overturn SAFE is something being discussed now in Luxembourg, and the EU plan on a loan to Ukraine to use as a guarantee infringes international treaties, and that's why various member states, including Belgium and third countries as well, the US, China and others, are against this illegal plan. Outside law, tyranny, using double measures. So people are imposing their irrational will on. We need international law based on rules. Colleagues, we can't be proud of this nor claim to give lessons to others. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Sra. Presidente, Sr. Comissário. A próxima reunião do Conselho Europeu é sinónimo também do quadro financeiro plurianual e dizer que este Parlamento está...
The Multiannual Financial Programme shows that this Parliament is determined to ensure that negotiations are concluded between now and the end of 2027, because this is an absolutely vital budgetary instrument. But not only that, it is a political choice. And so we want a tangible outcome to those negotiations on the MFF, as it is really the beating heart of the European Union. Therefore, the Commission's proposal, of course, is not straightforward. It is there to fund a variety of different programs with own resources in such a way as to allow the European Union to face up to unforeseen circumstances at pace, and that is why we need to beef up the role of the regions and make sure that the European Union is part of people's ordinary daily lives and that they are at the heart of the European project, and make sure that solidarity is translated into specific projects. Make sure that nobody is left behind, because without solidarity there is no future of our union. Thank you.
President, colleagues, this is not the moment for hesitation. It's not the moment for half measures, not the moment to retreat into narrow interests. This is actually the moment to stand together, to show real European leadership and to act decisively. Please, Council, show that even if you're not present now. We must get the Mercosur agreement done. We must make Russia pay for its war of aggression against Ukraine with the frozen Russian assets. We must invest seriously in defense. We must cut red tape and bureaucracy so that Europe can compete, innovate and lead again. And we need, of course, to take back control of migration and secure our borders. Colleagues, we live in extraordinary times, and extraordinary times demands responsibility and courage. Now is the time to make Europe stronger, safer, and to defend our freedoms today and for future generations. Long live Europe. Thank you.
The next speaker is Evin Insir.
Colleagues, let's be absolutely clear. No decisions about Ukraine can be made over the heads of the Ukrainian people. The negotiations where Russia, with support from the United States, demand that Ukraine surrender territory it has defended with extraordinary courage is shameful. And at the same time, there are calls to weaken Ukraine's military and deny its right to choose its own future, including NATO membership. It is important that Europe secure the resources Ukraine needs to continue defending itself. Using frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine is not only reasonable, it is justified given the immense destruction caused by Russian war. But it is not trustworthy to, as EPP, on one hand, echo the same words and demands as us, and at the same time cooperate and legitimize the best friend of Putin. Colleagues, pro-European forces must unite. We must deepen our unity and take greater responsibility for our own security, not legitimize Putin's friends.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rasmus Andresen.
Dank. Mit einem Erbsenhaushalt.
The EU needs to take action and defend itself against Trump, Putin and the rest. We need a strong budget. We are weak if we don't have a strong budget. And when we're talking about financial policy, I was surprised that Ursula von der Leyen in her speech did not say a word about key decisions on the Multiannual Financial Framework. I hope that the Commission at a later stage will say something about that. We also need to look at social cohesion. And Trump, Putin and others want to weaken the EU. The heads of state and government, when talking about budget issues, are going down the wrong path. They talk about what they have to pay into the common fund, but they don't talk about all the benefits from EU funding and social cohesion first and foremost. I would like to see a change here. I would like Chancellor Merz to change his position and a strong budget.
Vážená paní předsedající.
Madam President, since the coup of Maidan and since the imposition of the present regime, most of the EU institutions and governments have been supporting Ukraine in its self-destruction. Since the beginning, it has been clear that the Ukraine cannot militarily defeat Russia, not even with massive support of the US and the EU. It has turned out it's impossible to break Russia through military expenses and 20 packets of sanctions, as was the original intention. The result of the so-called support for Ukraine is the continuation of war and death of further hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men. Ukraine would have been able to reach peace agreement under much better conditions than today. It was not allowed. If the war in the Ukraine continues, the Ukraine will lose further territory. It is obvious that the representatives of a number of EU countries wish for the continuation of the war. A refusal to adopt realistic solution will only prolong the suffering of the Ukrainian people.
Do you accept the blue card? Herr Sieper, please.
Thank you, colleague, that you have accepted my blue card. I was wondering if you are aware of two things. First, are you aware that if a snail started where the Russian army started at the Ukrainian border 3 years ago, that the snail would now have reached Czechia, while the Russian army is still bogged down in the Donbass? This is not a picture that I'm painting. That's an actual fact. You can calculate this. And second, you as a Czech, do you really think that it's good if Russian tanks roll through your country? I think you know better. Thank you.
Je mi skoro trapné odpovídat.
I find it embarrassing to answer such a naive question. We have to ask ourselves, what would be the benefit for Russia to continue the war if Russia wanted further territory when they already have a vast territory, or further resources where they already have vast resources? Or would they want to achieve self-destruction by waging further war? These ideas are nonsensical. I fear that if you continue preparing warmongering as you have been doing so far, you will only achieve the continuation of the war, that the war will reach Central and Western Europe, and that's probably what you want.
Thank you, Ms. Vice President. To maybe pose the additional question quite simply and not naive, because I'm really trying to be constructive here in this House, you know, sometimes it's hard. Who is the aggressor? Who is the one who pursues war? The one who stays at home and maybe disagrees on a political, geopolitical, strategical level, or the one that sends his tanks, his missiles, his soldiers into the territory of a sovereign nation? Are you aware of the concept of war of aggression? Thank you.
To put it simply, Russia is the aggressor. The question is how long it has taken to provoke them to become aggressor. The attacks against the Russian population in the east of the Ukraine, that is quite clear. So if you fail to understand this, I don't know what is there to talk about. You are preparing war, and I fear that you will succeed. And the battlefield will be Eastern Europe, and this is what we want to avoid.
Herr Lagodinsky, you could have asked a blue card. I cannot do it like this. Thank you. Mr. Ressler.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Dear colleagues, in these decisive times of truth for Europe, in these dangerous times, there comes a time to take on responsibility for our security, competitiveness, but also this week at the meeting of EU leaders for an equal development of Europe. There comes a time to throw away misconceptions, all the experiments. We need to be unified. We need to respond to the threats, dangers. We need to have self-respect. We need to have more courage. There comes a time for a strong financial support for Ukraine so that there can be a lasting peace. There comes a time for more self-criticism also here in the European Parliament, because we have some weaknesses. We have over-regulation, we have some senseless bureaucratic rules, but also a chaotic politics regarding migration. There comes a time to accept the realities of the new world. There comes a time to accept the realities of the results of the elections that took place a year ago. There comes a time for the first serious debate on the MMF, the key geopolitical instrument that is going to test the unity of Europe, that should not divide Europe further. This is why we have the responsibility to cooperate here in the European Parliament. We should not rely on others. We need to be the ones to introduce Europe to the new world.
Scapini.
Ok. Stimate coleg, ați spus în discursul dumneavoastră că doriți o dezvoltare.
Colleague, you said that you wanted equal development in Europe. Now, do you think that what's been presented by President von der Leyen now at the end of this year shows something of that, provides a basis? I've been in the parliament since 2014, and Romanian farmers still get different subsidies to others, and there's still market fragmentation. Do you think that the report from the President of the Commission is realistic, or is it just slogans that we don't need?
Thank you very much for this question. I'm going to explain myself. This is one of the key topics of this council meeting. The MMF is going to be the debate. Well, the first pillar is focused on cohesion, This is the key policy of the European project. And on the other hand, the new focus on competitiveness. And it's clear that EPP supports this. But as I say, the balance between the pillars needs to contribute to the equal development of all the regions of Europe. But also Europe needs to be competitiveness compared to others.
Gibt es eine Nachfrage? Ja, es gibt noch eine Nachfrage. Herr Ressler.
A follow-up question, Mr. Ressler.
Question. I just want to explain for those who don't know who are in the room. If you have a blue card, you always have the possibility also to ask an additional question to that.
Thank you very much.
Just to inform you about the rules we have.
Vă mulțumesc pentru răspuns. Ideea este că ați
Thank you for your reply. But you were talking about cohesion policy and regional development policy. But the specific question is whether in future policy it would be good to have a budget for the CAP which would be the same as for cohesion policy. Thank you.
I think it's clear to all of us here in the EP that we are at the very beginning of a large, difficult process. The 2026 is going to be marked by dynamic conversations here in the European Parliament, but also between member states. There is no set outcome of those debates. The proposal of the European Commission from July has unified the Parliament here. Our doubts are clear, but we are going to fight together in the European Parliament to maintain the identity of CAP, and the cohesion policy is going to be the center of our policies too.
Bitte schön.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen.
President, colleagues, well, it's quite likely that we're facing the most important European Council since we were set up. And that's because, well, we're talking about Russian assets. But it's not just a factual issue. It's more about whether Ukraine is given oxygen to breathe or whether they've got to the end and are going to have to subject themselves to a Russian-American dictatorship. What we're talking about here is whether after the rhetorical solidarity we've been hearing from heads of state and government for years, whether they're actually going to deliver now, not leaving Belgium standing in the rain is not only a question of internal solidarity in Europe, but rather whether Europe can stand together in the moment of need. We've heard these wonderful words of solidarity, but are we going to follow up with facts for Ukraine? And so I'm calling on Council, heads of state and government, to come together to find a solution whereby Russian assets can be used for Ukraine and that all member states equally share the risk. Then there is a chance for the Ukrainians to have peace negotiations on an equal footing. That's our responsibility.
Van den Driesel.
Voorzitter, collega's.
Honourable members, Europe is the weak link, and unfortunately the European Union is to blame. It started as a peace project and has now become a warmongering monster project. Smaller member states cannot see their rights trampled underfoot by larger countries. That is the lesson we must learn from history. And so the veto right is vitally important. It is a guarantee of freedom, and it is no longer being respected. Legal manipulation is being applied. And we are seeing brutal power plays. Whatever the cost, they are looking to wage war as long as they themselves do not have to pay the price. What about these Russian frozen assets? What if those do not suffice and they need further billions? We are seeing cynicism and warmongering by the European Union. We are seeing a bank heist, if you like, the largest bank heist in history, which comes with great risk. If you wish to support Ukraine, you are free to do so with your own resources and bear your own responsibilities. Thank you.
2 blue cards, one from Mr. Sieper and one from Mr. Lagodinsky. Do you accept both? Yeah, fine. So we start with Mr. Sieper and after that, Mr. Lagodinsky.
Dank u wel. Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege, dass Sie die...
Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to the blue card. You talked about a bank heist. I've got a similar question for you. So if this really is a heist, so a bank robbery, and then you've got the robbers in the bank with their hostages and they've already shot half of the hostages in cold blood, what do you do? I mean, do you go in? Do you negotiate? Do you call them up and say, oh, come on, here's €1 million, go home, release the hostages, it'll all be fine? Or do you send in a special operational commando? Is that not what we should be doing with Russia? I mean, should we not be taking on the bank robbers rather than allowing them to return home with their booty?
Now, of course, you need to show responsibility. Now, that tale may play well with children, but it is not realistic. Now, we have a risk here with this bank heist. It undermines the financial stability of Europe and the Western banking system. We have another risk here. The European Union is not willing to show solidarity and collectively guarantee this risk. It is leaving it to a small member state alone, and I can't accept that risk. Thank you.
Additional, please, Mr. Sieper.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So, first up, the question. So, aren't you telling your voters what you believe? So apparently I'm just, expressing my opinion and yours is the objective hard truth, deceiving voters. So, but you didn't really answer my question at all. If we've got a violent bank robber, should we reward them by allowing them to, take their booty back home with them? We're going to support Belgium if the assets are frozen. Of course we'll do that. We're Europeans and we stand together.
What the colleague has said really shows that we have a very fundamental different view of reality. You talk about moral principles. I am being realistic here. The world works on the basis of needs and how you resolve conflict. And we need to restore peace in Europe.
Please.
So it's not just a reality, it's not just that you have a different perspective on reality, but I sometimes feel that you are very remote, far removed from reality. Apparently, there are no other states all suffering from the superpowers. I mean, what about the Baltic states? What about Poland? What about those countries? They need support. They need our assistance. And to stand there and say that this really is just a project for the great powers alone is a denial of reality, because you're saying that we should broker deals with Russia to the detriment of the small states. Actually, we should be doing things the other way around.
Honourable members, that is an interesting viewpoint. You refer to Baltic states and Poland, EU member states. And so is Belgium, my country, and we would show solidarity accordingly. Now, what are our duties? We need to face facts. Ukraine is not a member of the European Union nor NATO. There is no treaty that requires us to demonstrate solidarity. Now, how I would recognise a moral duty to support Ukraine, and that is what my party and country has done by taking in refugees.
Follow-up question.
Gar nicht.
Well, you know, it's not about Ukraine. I mean, you stated it quite clearly. You said that the smaller member states who are suffering from Russian aggression as a result of our defence policy. But I say to you, that is not true. They are seeking protection. Now, they have been neglected and they have been left vulnerable for many years, and we need to correct our course now. And then you start telling stories about Ukraine. It's the exact opposite of what you said. So please do correct that assertion that you're defending the small states.
I really don't understand what you're driving at. My point is that small member states need their veto right to protect themselves. Larger countries cannot trample underfoot the smaller member states. That is precisely the point I was making.
Thank you very much. So the next speaker is Charlie Weimers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner. I would like to express my gratitude to the Danish Presidency for its tough and serious approach on migration. The new majority in Europe will make sure Parliament works with the Council, not against it, to regain control. Illegal migrants must understand one thing very clearly. There is no way they will make Europe their home. The EU budget must reflect that reality. Fund wall construction at the external border, make EU return hubs real, build them. And for every migrant a foreign country refuses to take back, 10,000 euros is automatically cut from EU aid. No bargaining, no exceptions. That is firm and it is fair. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Weimers, there we are again. Maybe it will bring you as many clicks as last time. You said that there is no way, or illegal migrants have to understand that there is no way that they can make Europe their home. My ancestors were illegal migrants from France to Germany 200 years ago, because there was a big war, you know the drill, Napoleon, all this. So my question is, isn't there at least some possibility that through time also illegal migrants can find a new home in a new place? Thank you.
Well, obviously there are lots of historical examples that you could use, but the situation today is quite clear that migrants have been passing through safe countries on their way to destination countries in Northern Europe, primarily like Germany, like Sweden, asylum shopping, and we're starting to deal with that problem now by designating safe third countries, by stopping this asylum shopping. Are you in favor of asylum shopping, Mr. Sipa?
No, not at all. I think it's a terrible thing when people are forced to cross more borders than they need to. And I think no migrant in the world has any interest in crossing more than one border illegally. It's a terrible process. It's dangerous. You rely on criminals, on people that will abduct you, that will rape you, that will take your money. So if the EU would have worked together better in the past, we would have had a system where migrants can come to us through a safe process. They can be helped at the border, distributed to a country that wants to help them and take them into shelter, and that's the solution. Migrants don't do this because they want to, because they have to. Thank you.
So I gather that it's the great weather in Sweden that made so many migrants go to my country instead of staying in the very dark and cold Italy, right? Just a coincidence, wasn't it? I mean, wake up, welcome to reality. They pick destination countries because of our welfare systems. Why are not Somalis going to the stable and democratic Somaliland, for example, instead of going to Germany? Ask yourself that question, and you know the answer is quite easy to understand, really. Thanks.
A teraz poprosím kolegyňu Strach-Zimmermann.
And now, colleague Strach-Zimmermann, the floor is yours.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
President, colleagues. Europe this week is facing an existential decision. Are we going to play an essential global role in this world, or are we on the way to becoming nothing that's not taken seriously? We've seen this brutal Russian war of aggression. If it is to come to an end, then pressure on the aggressor has to be racked up from Europe. And so I'm calling on Council to release these assets in order to strengthen the Ukrainians financially, militarily, and to strengthen reconstruction. I'm calling on the governments of the European nations. Ukraine must be put in a position to neutralize Russian military targets so that finally we can put an end to these attacks on Ukraine. 93% of them are targeted at civilian targets because Putin wants to bomb Ukraine empty. So a call to the Commission and our countries to sit down together and work out a plan. Russia has to be at the table, the United States, but in particular Ukraine and Europeans, those states as well that are on the Russian border, they have to be at the table as well in order to discuss a lasting peace. Lasting isn't about pushing on a button, which the United States apparently want to do, that it's all lovely, let's go back home again. Sustainable lasting means that Russia never again will threaten this continent and beyond that, the world, sending it up in flames. So, colleagues, Slava Ukraini before Christmas. Long live Europe.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Berendsen, the floor is yours.
Honourable members, this truly is a wake-up call. We hear that time and again. Now, how is it that we are constantly caught unawares when the US says that we need to take responsibility for our own security? We cannot be reliant on Russian gas. We saw that in the past, and similarly threatened blockades on exports of raw materials. We need to change course swiftly. Member states in the European Union have a huge task ahead of them. We need to strengthen our sovereignty, strengthen our position. We need to make choices, prioritise. If everything is a priority, then nothing is. We need to make choices to strengthen our security, to speed up the energy transition, move to an economy of the future, and get a handle on migration. We need to make those choices, and that means we need to leave aside many other issues in the years ahead. We need to be self-aware. We need to build a strong Europe in a dangerous world. That is the task ahead of us, and that is what we must rise to. Thank you.
Accept it. Looks like you will. Yep, thank you. Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, Sr. Deputado. Sr. Presidente, Sr. Deputado Berendsen, o senhor mostra-se espantado.
President, Mr. Berendsen, you are surprised by the arrogance of the US administration through this national security strategy and against the EU. You shouldn't be surprised. It's the result of the submissive behaviour of the EU in the face of American interests. And it's a consequence of having accepted Trump dictating the military expenditure of NATO, or the customs tariffs being accepted by von der Leyen. So, are they going to continue with this?
Thank you for that question, colleague. I don't think you listened to what I said. We would agree on many points, just one difference. There is no reason why the EU should be surprised or caught unawares by what the US has said. We need to take responsibility for our own security and autonomy.
Thank you. I think there is no follow-up questions. Let me give the floor to Mr. Glucksmann.
Chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, it is 1 minute to midnight for Europe in the face of Russia's war, American betrayal, and the Chinese offensive against our industrial production. So the time has now come to assert European sovereignty. The time has come to build our military sovereignty, our energy sovereignty, our industrial sovereignty. It is time to impose European preference and priority in all of our public procurement policies and to assert genuine European independence. We're at a tipping point, and it's time that we did not listen to the voices of capitulation here in this House. Yes, you over there on the right, the false patriots, who ever since the beginning of this debate have submitted to Trump and to Putin. You are the puppets of foreign powers, but you will not prevail. We together will build a Europe which will stand the test of time.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Bay.
Well, these things are going beyond us. Basically, we heard the speech from President von der Leyen beforehand. Behind that speech, there's a pretension that the EU or the European institutions can intervene in all areas, even though we don't have a joint vision from member states. There's no strategic independence, particularly in terms of conflict resolution, whether we're talking Gaza, Russia, Ukraine. Then we've got the MFF, an increasing budget for the EU and therefore increasing contributions from member states. Particularly for the net contributors, they're going to have to dig deeper into their pockets as our fellow citizens. The European Commission is completely deaf to the will of our people, refusing physical barriers on the external borders. The overseas territories have to be respected because they spread the idea of Europe. They're calling for the protection of European identity, and you're supporting Oxfam, Islamic Relief, all of these associations which are playing according to an Islamic agenda. It's time that the European Commission came out of its ivory towers and listened to what the people are really saying. Thank you.
And now, colleague De La Valle, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente. Stati Uniti e Russia parlano di un possibile
The US and Russia are debating a possible peace plan, but we are seeing military mobilization, and we in Europe are dependent on Russian gas, and we are far removed from reality. Otherwise, the war would already be won. Now we're talking about reconstruction as well as strategic independence, but all we have from the US is hypocrisy. So this is the ugly reality, and that is why we have to continue with negotiations. But we find Europe one day paying court to Trump, and the next, which is pushing for a continuation of war in Ukraine. And now we're talking about 215 billion going to Ukraine to further the war. But Ukraine will never manage to repay such sins. And that is why we need to work in the interests of Italians, Europeans, and Ukraine for years to come, not waste more money on war, which amounts to a political defeat. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Madam Juknevičiene, the floor is yours.
In my country, Lithuania, the absolutely majority of people believe in the European Union. And they are waiting for even faster decisions, especially regarding aid to Ukraine, frozen assets, Eastern Flank Watch, and European Drone Defense Initiative. People understand that the EU is becoming the mainstay not only of our prosperity but also of our security. Our pensioners are not richer than the Spanish or Belgium, but they understand the scale of the threats well. In the Lithuanian budget, 5.38% of GDP will be allocated to defense next year. The next couple of years will be the most dangerous for European security. I call on the leaders of the member states to understand this and remember famous expression of the American statesman James Freeman Clark. A politician thinks of the next election, a statesman of the next generation. European statesmen and stateswomen, let's think not only about next election, which is important, but also about the next generations. Thank you.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Nemec.
Dear colleagues, Europe faces the most demanding
Spoštovani kolegi,
partners, including the United States, are stepping back. We struggle to build new alliances, especially to the east. Mercosur comes to mind. Eternally, we are deeply divided. Some traditional supporters of a democratic and united Europe now aligned with increasingly extreme and destructive forces. Our double standards responding to conflicts are also eroding our credibility. The world around us is becoming more unpredictable, fragmented and dangerous. Unity and responsibility are no longer optional, they are a political necessity. The Western Balkans remain on the agenda, yet without tangible process. Your enlargement is a strategic investment in peace, security in the future of our continent, and a political promise of our stability, reform and shared values. Meanwhile, the Middle East continues to witness ceasefire violations and escalation of violence. The EU must clearly stand for international law. Thank you so much.
Ďakujem a teraz
I thank you. And now, colleague Tione, the floor is yours.
La publication
The release of the new US national security strategy has triggered a sad spectacle in Europe. We Europeans should be able to defend ourselves, but instead of self-reflection, what we have seen is various individuals designated the fifth state, enemies within. Last summer, Ursula von der Leyen bowed to Trump on Europe's trade. At the same time, Mark Rutte, European NATO Secretary General, turned himself into the Trump whisperer. You humiliated Europe, have hidden in Washington skirts for decades. You have prevented true independence in Europe. Honourable members, don't look for the scapegoat. There is no strategy in Europe and you are to blame. We, the patriots, will not give up our ideology. We're not looking for a Europe aligned on the US. We need to tackle the major challenges ahead, work together to build a European Europe. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím.
And now, colleague Madison.
Suur aitäh, head kolleegid. Esiteks
Thank you, dear colleagues. I am very concerned hearing about from the left and others crosswords about the United States because of their new security strategy, which is against Europe. I think it's unrealistic to expect that having decades, US having paid for European security, so that the left was able to invest billions in retirement monies and migration. And if the United States no longer wish to provide us this security, this is suddenly a problem. I disagree. Looking at the small states in Europe, in our neighborhoods, such as the Northern Eastern Europe, it is an existential question for us how our relationship with the United States lies. We could have criticism from other states, but it's a matter of principles. Germany could speak about strategic autonomy, but they can even not institute military service. So should we expect more from bubbles in Brussels, or should we expect more from our allies in the United States?
And now, colleague Forlas.
Commissioner, we are preparing for another European Council today talking about transatlantic relations, Ukraine and the EU's strategic autonomy. Allow me to say, though, that this is risky. Our European family is facing circumstances, but at the same time that we are talking about Ukraine, and rightly so, we have another member state, Cyprus, which for almost 5 decades has been under Turkish occupation. Well, we know that they've been illegally there and trampling the rights of our citizens. We've forgotten that last September here in this parliament, we had a resolution about releasing people, and just listen to something else as well. Last July and August, there were over 300 interventions of airspace and naval interventions around Cyprus as well. But what are we doing? Basically nothing. Turkey, what's going to happen during the upcoming presidency? What do you have to say about that?
And now, colleague Di Rupo.
Belgium doesn't want Russia to win. However, the vast majority of frozen assets are with Euroclear, and to use them without a guarantee of risk sharing by the largest possible number of European countries would expose Belgium to a massive financial and security risk. Now, if Russia were to win any legal case, then Belgium would be forced to repay up to 185 billion euro, which amounts to 30% of its annual GDP, which would have very serious consequences for Belgium's citizens and companies, and that is quite simply unacceptable. Therefore, such a far-reaching decision cannot be taken without an intergovernmental agreement which would guarantee fair burden sharing of risk amongst the largest possible number of member states. So let's be clear. Taking a decision in Council without the agreement of Belgium would be a huge mistake, and the option of European borrowing is therefore the most appropriate option in legal terms.
I'm sorry, your time is long down. But you have 2 blue cards. One is from Mr. Bistro and one is from Mr. Oliveira. Will you accept them? You have 2 blue cards. Card blue. Okay. So first to Mr. Bistron, please. Just a moment. Yes. And if you can please stand up. Thank you.
Sure. Ďakujem, pán predseda. Ich werde auf Deutsch fragen.
I'll ask my question in German. Honourable Member, may I address you in German?
Prima. Sie haben gerade aus...
Now, you talked about Belgium not wanting to shoulder the responsibility alone for seizing Russian assets. You talked about a fair resolution. You expect that we would lose any case, any legal case with the Russian Federation. So you are looking for some sort of illegal action where other countries pay?
Mon cher collègue, il faut savoir ce...
Listen, dear colleague, you need to know what you want in life. Either you act as Europeans and have a majority of countries behind you, otherwise there is no Europe. And let me just refer you to what Ms. von der Leyen said. She, on the one hand, suggested that Russian assets be utilised, and on the other hand, other option that we could have European borrowing, and that is the safest legal route if we are to avoid any difficulties down the line. Let me just remind you, there is such a thing as international law, and I would invite you to read the history of frozen assets, and particularly the use made thereof by the United Nations.
Obrigado, Presidente. Sr. Deputado Di Rupo, o senhor falou...
Thank you, President. Mr. Di Rupo, you talked about Russian assets and the extension of the war there. Now, what the EU is proposing would waste even more of what has been wasted to date. So my question is, do you think that the priority should be to extend the war rather than putting an end with a political decision which can guarantee security in Europe? And secondly, wouldn't these resources be better used for schools and housing in Europe?
Well, my position, absolutely. Dear colleague, my solution is peace and negotiation. But you and your party over there are turning it on its head and telling lies, lies which appear to be the truth. But we don't want to prolong this war. We want peace, and we want Russian losses. But there is such a thing as international law. I mean, that may have escaped your notice, but fortunately that is the case, because, you know, the day the EU fails to respect international law itself, really, then the game over. That will be the end.
Yeah, merci.
And now, colleague Sinkevičius, the floor is yours.
Okay. Commissioner, dear colleagues, European Council will be a real test of our credibility on Ukraine, on solidarity, and most importantly, whether Europe can take responsibility when it matters. The Russian frozen assets are held across Europe. They are mainly in Belgium, but also in countries like France or Luxembourg. And this is not Belgium's or those countries' problem. It's European responsibility. If Europe decides to use these assets to support Ukraine, which is absolutely critical at this moment, Europe also must stand behind that decision. And that means clear EU-level guarantees. No member state should ever be left alone to carry the risk of decision that we are taking together. And that means a real European solidarity that can be understood across Europe. Ukraine cannot wait, and Europe cannot hide behind legal doubts while asking one country to assume all the burden. So strategic autonomy, first of all, for us means acting together. So this Council must deliver a clear message. European solidarity is real, concrete, and it comes with responsibility.
Thank you very much. And now, colleague Aust, the floor is yours.
For 10 years, we in the AfD were insulted and decried as anti-European militarists. We had called for security independence from the US. We had called for investment in strategic autonomy. We wanted to look to invest in our own security capabilities. You turned a blind eye to reality. In 2011, Barack Obama said that the US would become a Pacific power and would not want to deploy forces to Europe. For 15 years, you have wasted time on security policy on this continent. You have led us into a dead end. You're not the right people to move us forward. You are now veering to the other extreme. We have bowed to the US for decades, and now you are opposing the entire administration. We are reliant on the US. There are countless terrorist attacks recently in Bavaria that were only prevented thanks to information from the US intelligence services. You are threatening the security of Germans. We want true cooperation, not submission, not flattery. We want a true partnership. Nothing should be dictated to us. We should not be told where to deploy our soldiers. We do not want anyone preaching to us. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu.
And now, colleague Kaliňák, the floor is yours. Madam Chairperson von der Leyen, here we are once again, and once again you're proposing to do the same thing you've been proposing for the past 3 years. You want to send tens of billions euros to a country where one corruption scandal follows another, where the economy is controlled by oligarchs and where our billions disappear without any effect on the battlefield. You do the same thing expecting a different result. That is not a strategy. That is the textbook definition of insanity. And even though I don't doubt that there are a couple of madmen sitting here among us, the majority, including you, Madam von der Leyen, who support this senseless prolongation of this conflict, do so not because you are mad people, but because you are not sovereign politicians. You are just obedient executors of the interests of the military-industrial complex, whose profits are breaking all records at the expense of Ukrainian lives and European resources. You conceal this servility behind morals and solidarity with the victim, but you just want to prolong the war. I ask you, Madam von der Leyen, if you don't want to contribute to peace, at least please do not stand in its way. Thank you. You have a blue card from colleague Bystroň.
Po slovensky.
In Slovak.
Ale ak chcete, môžem aj po nemecky.
But if you want to, says Mr. Bystroň, I can continue in German. So, colleague, how do you explain this? We've been listening for a very long time from Madam von der Leyen and her colleagues that Europe is fighting for Ukrainians, and now independent surveys in Ukraine show that over 70% of Ukrainians want this war conflict to end. And the same people who are telling us that we are actually fighting for Ukrainians now, because Ukrainians themselves want to end the conflict, tell us that no, the conflict needs to be financed and prolonged from the taxpayers' money. How do you explain this? I think, responds Mr. Kaliňák, that the response is shown in what position she took before and what corruption scandals are linked to her in the past, and also how she was the Minister of Defense in Germany. So I think that is where the roots are of all this, and why, despite the surveys that clearly show that Ukrainians really want peace now, they don't want to fight anymore, we can have a look at the numbers of the people who fled this country, who fled Ukraine. Despite that, some politicians moralize and they say how we need to fight more. And now, colleague Niedermayer.
Thank you, Mr. President. U.S. administration view on situation of Europe and its future should not lead to our anger. It should lead to our reflection and action. Obviously, the Council is the right way to start with that. So let me just give 3 suggestions. First of all, Russian money should be those who finance the Ukraine. It's economically and morally right. So I call the Council to find an agreement while taking the legitimate request of Belgian government into the account. The second, EU needs stronger defense. I guess the clear is absolutely right. And we need joint investment in some area. I believe that some part of our defense, like electronic defense, like the missile defense and drones, should be built together. And I believe that financing that together is the right thing. So I hope that the Council will find the courage to look after our defense the right and the most effective way. Last and least, I don't want to go into the details about our competitiveness, about our economic sovereignty. That will be probably part of geopolitical debate at the Council. I just want to say that instead of trying to do what we could do, we should aim for what we should do, and it is the difference. And only addressing the real things, the big things, the single market and competitiveness, our delay in implementing technologies like artificial intelligence will lead to a bright future for Europe. Thank you.
I thank you, and now Madam Vice President Schaldemose.
Kære minister, tiden er ikke inde til, at vi sætter...
Commissioner, Minister, we cannot bring into question our support for Ukraine. Ukraine has been facing warfare for almost 4,000 days now, because we mustn't forget the attack on Crimea. So they're not asking for us just to support them, they're calling for our action. We have to be in a position, therefore, to solve the financial issues, because even if Ukraine is part of our region, they are also responsible for war in Europe. And if Russia has struck there, they can strike us as well. So it's our duty to act. We therefore call for Russian imports of Russian oil into Europe be stopped. That's allowing them to fund this war. I do hope that the Council will be able to solve the situation. The Ukrainians are calling on us to act, and they're helping us to defend peace in Europe.
I understand that the government removed the grading scale of -3 before they started, because they're failing on all parameters. The government said they would continue the green transition, and the rest of the world has moved on, thinking of competitiveness. In Europe, we're still producing more bureaucracy. The government in Denmark said that they want to improve the competitiveness level. In the right wing, we were calling for a more ambitious line on the omnibus. The compromise that we came away with was less ambition than what the European Parliament agreed on. Denmark has contributed more than the 17 EU countries who have given least to Ukraine, and Denmark is trying to defend democracy. Mette Frederiksen and the Social Democrats have let us down, and the Spanish have given 25 times less. In Malta, even less. Who are blocking the Russian loans and the freezing of Russian assets? It's the Social Democrats in the government in Belgium. And they're continuing to cheat the Danes.
Blue card from colleague Bosse.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Tusind tak for at...
Thank you for accepting a blue card. I have two questions for you, Anas. First of all, was it Russia that was the aggressor and entered Ukraine, and it continues to be the aggressor and can stop the Ukraine war just by withdrawing? Secondly, how many times here in the hemicycle has Anders Vistesen voted in favour of increasing the support to Ukraine? It's regrettable that Stine Bosse doesn't know that Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine. When they entered the Crimea, the Social Democrats, the EPP and others said that Russia wasn't a threat in the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm happy that we have the same conclusion, that it's silly to scrap conscription and all the things that we've been fighting for all these years when Stine Bosse's party was trying to cut Danish defence.
Du nåede så ikke at svare på.
You didn't answer my second question, but I can do that on your behalf, because at no time did you vote in favour of assistance to Ukraine. As a Dane and as a European, that's regrettable, very deeply regrettable.
Stine Bosses historie for...
You're falsifying things. The Danish People's Party voted in favour of everything, but we haven't been able to convince the others. That's why you're without any clothes now. You're naked. You haven't been able to convince your friends. Your group chairman said at the start of the war it shouldn't be a humiliation of Putin. That's what Macron said. And not understand you're talking about. And perhaps that goes against the fake news that Stine Bosse and her party propagate.
Děkuji, pane předsedající.
Thank you very much, President. If we want proper peace in Ukraine, we must not stop supporting the country militarily and economically. I hope that we will see this happen, but we need, and we hope that the USA will be involved, but perhaps this will be down to Europe to ensure this is the case. The most acceptable solution is the reparation loan, but I do understand the fears of the Belgian government that freezing assets, Russian assets, could have negative effects on Belgium. Therefore, I believe that Western countries should support Belgium and also provide guarantees, not in line with what the new Czech government is saying, because otherwise this could reach our borders and this could have a huge negative political impact.
Paní kolegyně Vrecionová, blue card od kolegu Bistroňa. Berete?
You have a blue card. Do you accept that?
Paní kolegyně, řekla jste dvě věci. Za prvé, že doufáte, že Spojené státy americké budou nadále podporovat válku na Ukrajině, a pak, že bychom měli...
Thank you. You hope that the United States, as before, will support Ukraine, and that we need to show solidarity with Ukraine. Here in the European Union, Russian assets should be used to support Ukraine. That's your view. Have you not seen the new strategy from the USA, the national security strategy, that says that President Trump, from the outset, has wanted to end this conflict? What do you want to see?
Já jsem zaprvé neřekla, že Spojené státy...
Well, first of all, I didn't say that I want the United States to support the war. No, they need to support Ukraine, not the war in Ukraine. Of course, I have read the National Defense Strategy, and therefore I say that it is possible that the burden of support may lie on Europe's shoulders. And it's in the interests of the Czech Republic and Europe that Russia is kept as far away from our borders as possible. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
President, colleagues, Commissioner, it looks like there is going to be progress made in the negotiations on peace in Ukraine. Let's cross our fingers. And Merz has made some progress there as well, and that is good. But there is one very difficult question as well. Why did it not happen under the leadership of the President of the Commission? Well, I think it's a very clear reason, because the foreign policy is our Achilles heel in the EU. Let's be honest. we will not be able to depend on the US anymore. We're going to have to take responsibility for our own security. And that is what von der Leyen has just said. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And if we have Article 5 in our treaties, we've got Article 42, Para 7, which is mutual assistance, and the need to use all of the resources that we have. But the question here is, what does that mean today in practice? Today, that doesn't mean anything. It's just empty. It's an empty box. Why? Well, because we don't have a European defence. Without defence, we are not really there at the table. We are on the menu instead. Colleagues, many comments have been said about financial support for Ukraine, and we hope to find a solution over the next few days that will support Ukraine, guarantee our security, improve it, and make sure that no one is going to be exposed to all of these risks. And that's possible, but it's going to require cooperation. European solidarity instead of just pointing the finger at Belgium. Thank you.
Will you accept the blue card from Mr. Cosi?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I listened to you very carefully, colleague, and I fully agree with you. I mean, we either we give ourselves the strength to be an actor, or we are at the menu. Either we stay at the table, or we are in the menu of Trump and Putin. So I wonder how your group can join forces every day in this hemicycle with the allies of Trump and Putin. How can you today here say that you want a stronger Europe, a sovereign Europe, and then daily joining forces with the best allies of our enemies?
Thank you.
Wel, collega, ik denk...
Well, I think that if we're talking about strengthening Europe, then we are talking about two important things here. Our competitiveness in our industry, we need to strengthen it. We need to take a step forward here. We shouldn't be going backwards. Otherwise, we're going to lose our industry. If I look at the past few years, we've lost 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs we've lost. We've lost in competitiveness. That's more than a wake-up call. And we then, when we're talking about these omnibuses, we need to make progress to make sure that companies stay here. And then another second challenge is making sure that we have European defence. And I hope that I can find you there as a partner when we're talking about that.
And to the colleagues who request additional blue cards, you asked during the, no, I cannot take more blue cards. If you want to make it to the catch the eye, I'm not going to take more blue cards than one per speaker. So let me give the floor to Mr. Reuten. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President, Commission, Council, colleagues. We need real sense of urgency and determination. For a long time, we in this House asked for bringing Russia's assets in place. So thank you, Commission, for the reparations loan proposal, and thanks to the Council for ending the ability of Russia's assets to block our sanctions against Russia's financial assets. This clears the way, but myths are stubborn. So for tomorrow's final discussions with Prime Minister De Wever, but also with others, it's not theft. The assets stay frozen. Used is the cash owned by financial institutions structured in a loan. Belgium and others are not alone. When did we ever leave a member state to carry such responsibility alone? Proposals prove the opposite. And this will not destabilize the euro. Our sanctions did not, using Article 122 did not, nor will this legal action. And Euroclear's profits are not our concern, and litigation will not exceed 1.5 billion euros already withheld by Euroclear. The risk is not too high. The greatest risk is doing nothing, and that is unmitigated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You have a blue card from Mr. Grajoulis from the very right. Will you? No? Okay. And let me give the floor to colleague Buzelaga.
Dear Commissioner, or as it should be, dear Minister of the United States of Europe, please thank your boss for her unwavering support for Ukraine. It's absolutely clear we need to make Russia pay for the mass murdering that they're doing in Ukraine. The fact that Trump does not support this is another sign that the transatlantic relationship is really drowning in the transatlantic. But for Europe and for Ukraine to be able to defend itself in the next wave of Russian aggression and to deal with the next MAGA president, we need to do more fundamental changes. We are still playing chess on a chessboard that others put the flamethrower to. We need to make more fundamental changes. Commissioner, it's time to really change the rules. And that means we need to imagine a new European Union, a United States of Europe, where we have a real government that can defend our interests, where we are not just transferring some funds to national ministries of defense, but where we open the treaties. And it's up to the European Council to take the Parliament's position and open the treaties. You just need 14 countries. You can vote this weekend or tomorrow and make it a reality. We need a new European Union now. Thank you.
Ďakujem a ako posledný z prihlásených.
Thank you very much. The last speaker is Mr. Oliveira.
Obrigado, Presidente. Senhor Comissário.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Mr. Šefčovič. The next European Council meeting, we have Trump, we have the same position of submission and vassalization of Europe with the US. The same replies to the needs of people, the same complicity with genocide in Palestine. The Commission and the Council, if they want to take their distance from Trump, they need to change their policy. Distinguish yourselves, stand out. Look at the economy. Look at what are the needs of the people and what will be the profits of the big multinationals. Health, housing, jobs, social problems affecting people rather than making people's needs a source of revenue, rather than spending people's resources in militarization and war. Put an end, finally, to the Israel's neo-colonial policies and genocide. And we have to work for people and not to submit ourselves to the US.
And there is quite a number, but I think we should be able to make it. And let me start with Madame Brnjac. The floor is yours.
Hvala predsjedniče, povjereniče. Thank you, Commissioner. For the future direction of the EU, while we provide strong support to Ukraine, we need to make strategic decisions for resilience and autonomy of the EU in the upcoming years. The new financial framework needs to be directed towards priorities, strengthening us. Europe cannot be competitive without serious investment into industry, research, innovation, but also energy independence and security. It doesn't mean closing ourselves to partners, but strong transatlantic relationship will still be the foundation of our prosperity. But we need to act independently when this is necessary. Thank you.
Mr. López Aguilar, please.
Commissioner Šefčovič, estamos de acuerdo que...
We agree. The national security strategy from Mr. Trump is insulting for the European Union, but this also speeds up our strategic autonomy. But the question is how? Without an MFF which has the resources for this, that does not have funding for a problem such as affordable housing and regulating the intervention of vulture funds, with the green ambition to prolong the combustion engine availability in Europe. What about all these things? What Trump wants is he wants to support far right and nationalism, and he wants a weak and divided Europe. But the response we need is the opposite. We need a united Europe, finally, that has woken up and that defends its values. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Goziho.
Thank you, Chair. Colleague, we must face reality. Washington now sees a strong European Union as a problem to solve, not an ally to support. President Trump has decided that Brussels is a bigger problem than Beijing. And the Kremlin endorses all this in Ukraine and elsewhere. Washington doesn't like a EU self-confident enough to defend its own interests, starting from the digital legislation. We can pretend that this doesn't happen, as many have done this morning in this hemicycle. We can think that Trump hasn't read the document, but we cannot change the reality. The national security strategy is a marker of where power is shifting in Washington. We must therefore prepare for a world where Europe can stand on its own, where Europe is free to choose. Well, I say to the Commission and to the Danish Presidency, a Europe which is free to choose is a Europe which reforms itself. Because with this governance, with this treaty, we will never make it. 14 leaders out of 27 are enough to launch the process. Please push Commission and Council to launch the process.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Van Lanschota. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Van Lanschot.
So, what do Trump, Putin, Xi and the tech autocrats have in common? They are all afraid of a united Europe. And that's why they want to destroy it. The US national security strategy says out loud what we have known for years. They want a Europe of 27 weak nations, a classic example of divide and conquer. So, we are on our own. And the President von der Leyen said, this is Europe's moment of independence. I agree with her. So, European Prime Ministers, this is one of the most important European Council meetings in years. Face reality and do what's needed. Use the frozen Russian assets and give them to Ukraine. Find new partners, ratify Mercosur, and defend our democracy by cracking down on foreign interference. At the end of the day, we, Europe, are in this together. We need a United States of Europe now, because that is the key to solving all the challenges of the 21st century. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Gazoulis.
Pone europarlamentarai, ypač valdantieji, dar prieš 15...
Members of Parliament, especially those who are in power. Obama said 15 years ago that we need more spending on defence. So what lesson was learnt from that? None at all. It's been said again and again, more spending on defence in Europe is required. But what was done? Nothing. In 2024, in Europe, less than 1% was spent on defence. So we are dependent on the USA. We should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. If we are to be united and if we'd been strong, then Russia would never have attacked Ukraine. And we don't need the USA and its proposals for peace plans. Take a look at yourselves. You're not strong. You are weak. You have been looking at Ukraine so that it would just end up in the situation where it was. And this then is also a violation of the Istanbul Convention.
Θέλω να διευκρινίσω ότι όσες φορές
I would like to clarify that whenever I've intervened, I've done that without supporting neither Putin nor Zelensky. I've never supported Trump, von der Leyen, none of them. I'm interested in the European citizens. These are the ones I support and represent. The intention to use the 200 billion euros of frozen Russian assets is an extremely dangerous choice, and I want this to be heard in here. I want you to know that before it is done. If we don't have an immunity for state funds, we will have funds that will be leaving the European system, and the trust in euro will be defeated. In order to avoid collapse, the ECB will have to print money. This will lead to inflation or overinflation. In practice, citizens with their salaries, with their pensions, will have to pay. Europe cannot shoot its own feet. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Milan.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Midyamon.
El Consejo Europeo de mañana.
Tomorrow's European Council will be very important. I'd like to focus on a couple of very important subjects. First of all, the next MFF. I think that's insufficient. in terms of structure and also in terms of quantity. We want a specific, well-funded fisheries fund. And secondly, the national security strategy contains provocations and errors as well. But we need to focus on our interests and have a good relationship with the United States. We need to try to influence Washington's policy. For example, on the Ukraine Pact, we should try not to be reactive and be proactive and anticipate decisions. We need to have a long-lasting, fair peace. We need to continue supporting Ukraine with options for supporting it. And we also need to move towards strategic autonomy. We also need to diversify our relationships and have them with countries and bolster them with countries across the world. For example, we have the EU-Mercosur agreement. We hope this will be signed as soon as possible.
Council to speak, so I really need to stick to time. And now over to Madame Grappini.
Domnule președinte, domnule comisar.
President, Commissioner, dear colleagues, this is our last plenary session for this year. And again, President von der Leyen did not have the patience to listen to all of us. She left the room. So what did she do? She praised herself, as she usually does. She started to tell us how we're going to finance the war rather than negotiate the peace. We've lost 1 million jobs this year. We haven't managed, Commissioner, although we spent so much time together with the Danish presidency, but however, we did not manage to conclude the trialogue concerning the customs, which would have been so important for the single market. Tomorrow, farmers are taking to the streets. We do not have energy independence. We pay 3 times what we should for energy. Maybe during this Christmas holiday, we will think of a project to really support European citizens, because people should be at the center of our action. We talked yesterday about the crisis of housing. We won't solve it until we have a stable and powerful economy and until we will be independent. Merry Christmas.
Prosím kolegu Brandstättera. Bitte sehr.
Mr. Brandstätter.
Thank you, Mr. President. I still think about the Americans who helped to free Europe, who had to rebuild our continent, and they were our friends. The US standing for democracy and for freedom. And then came Trump. He said Europe was founded to screw the United States. We know he knows nothing about history. But we also know that there are a lot of Americans who still are in favor of good relations with Europe. And that's what I say. We need better relations with cultural institutions, with students, with young people, with civil organizations. The Americans, in the majority, they are still our friends. And it must be clear, the Europeans, they work for peace. Trump, he works with Putin to make deals in Ukraine. We, the Europeans, we want peace in Ukraine, and that's important. And it has to be the Russian money to rebuild Ukraine, and here I think we're in a huge majority. Viva l'Europe! Thank you very much.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Tegerhoff, you have the floor.
Yeah.
Trump wants one thing, a divided Europe, because a divided Europe is easier to break. And the saddest part is some people in this house are playing along. But a united Europe is a stronger Europe. Joint climate disaster funds, cross-border rescue teams, early warning systems built together. That is Europe at its best, united in crisis, stronger than any single nation could ever be alone. Trumpists see this strength and they fear it. They're pulling the oldest puppet trick in the box, praise authoritarians and whisper to conservatives that courage is optional. And too many of you are falling for it. Worse, some of you don't even fall, you follow. If you agree with them, just say it clearly. If you don't, prove it. We need a United States of Europe now. It's not naive, it's courage. Cultivate it.
Ďakujem. Colleagues, please.
Thank you.
We still have one catch the eye, and the Commission and the Council. It's really polite that, those speaking can be heard. Now, Mr. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Last but not least, of course, Support Ukraine? Absolutely. Transatlantic relations at their lowest ebb ever. EU strategic autonomy? Absolutely vital. In relation to Ukraine, the frozen assets have to be utilised. Guarantees for Belgium, they don't have to carry the can for Europe, then it should be solved. As it regards America, Trump's attitude is simple. 2 words, America first. Our answer, 2 words, Europe first. So we have to grow industries in Europe. Made in Europe has to be our selling point. And above all, we have to develop the infrastructure to make it happen. And a good starting point would be to implement Commissioner Jorgensen's grid package, which we discussed yesterday, because that would guarantee us energy security, energy independence, and that will be a good starting point for strategic autonomy of the European Union.
Thank you. That closes the Catch the Eye. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Commission. Nech sa páči, pán komisár Šefčovič. And if I can ask you, colleagues, please try to be a bit quieter. We still have a debate going on. Thank you for understanding.
Veľmi pekne ďakujem, pán predsedajúci, honourable ministers, honourable members of the European Parliament. We had a very intense debate, and I think that we covered the most important topic this morning, which I'm sure pretty well reflects the tough reality of today's world. We all concluded that the world has become more dangerous, more transactional, where even the traditional relationships are severely tested. And therefore, I would like to thank to all of you. Mr. Gerbrandy was the first one to mention, Mr. Kelly was the last one to highlight it, for demonstrating confidence in Europe and highlighting our strengths, because nobody doubts that Europe is indeed the best place to live in, as it was also recalled by our colleague Mr. López Aguilar a few minutes ago. I agree with all those who state that it's important not to be kept in the past and not to dwell in nostalgia for the world which is long gone. But we should also not allow others to define who we are and what we should do. Therefore, I very much support all of you who calls upon us to be part of building the new one, where the Europe continues to be leader in respect of universal values, where Europe will continue to be leader in modern clean economy, and where we use our strengths and our major assets. I think that in this last plenary session of the European Parliament this year, we should demonstrate how proud we are of our economy, of our industry, of our agri-food sectors, of our people working hard in the factories and in the fields, because European economy showed extraordinary resilience. Despite the turbulences of this year, we are still biggest global trader in the world, ahead of the United States and ahead of China. And you know that our biggest single market in the world is example for many. So I would just agree with all of you who've been calling for, let's build on the strengths, let's build on our confidence. Many of you have called for strategic approach, for strategic autonomy. I think Mr. Sandro Gozzi was the last one to point it out. And we just presented to you a few weeks ago new economic security approach, which is open-ended document which has to be regularly updated to reflect new realities and to help us to tackle our dependencies. We need to open new markets for our industry. We must offer new opportunities for our excellent and very competitive agri-food sector. And we have to deliver on new access to the critical raw materials our economic operators desperately need. And all this were the key driving principles for all trade negotiations we conducted this year. All of them are reflected in our agreement with Mercosur. And therefore, I would like to thank you for your yesterday's support for unprecedented, far-reaching safeguards to address concerns of our farmers. And to all of you, Madam Garcia Perez, Mr. Lanchot, Mr. Webers, and many others, I really appreciate your support and your underscoring of the importance of this agreement. So let's work together to make this final strategic step. Let's ratify this key agreement and let's confirm our credibility towards our international partners. Many of you referred to the United States of America. Here I would say, as many of you just did, let's focus on our strengths. Let's show our self-confidence, and let's do it as a united Europe, as a united position, as a united approach from all our member states. I think that's very clear, and you are the representatives directly elected by the citizens across the Europe. And you know better than anyone else that it's only us Europeans who are the masters of our destiny. And I also would like to tell you that in my many encounters, which are not easy and are very tense very often with our US counterparts, I still believe that even despite of all these tensions, that they realize that the transatlantic relations have key strategic importance for us addressing some of the global challenges which we share. From taking on overcapacities in many products, through access to critical raw materials, because we learn in a hard way how dependencies are expensive, to the key priority of today, which is securing just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Therefore, I believe that in these crucial areas, cooperation is still better than confrontation. If you allow me, Mr. President, to conclude, I would like to thank the Danish Presidency, the Minister Beer and the whole team for very professional presidency under very tough times. I would like to reassure Madam Grappini that thanks to the Danish Presidency, we advanced custom reform process to the unprecedented extent, and I believe that with our Cypriot colleagues, we will conclude on this crucial five very, very soon. And if you allow me the last point, Mr. President, we had a lot of passionate debates in this House, in this hemicycle. I want to tell you that I appreciate all of them. I appreciate your intervention, your support for Europe, your support for close cooperation among the institutions. I would like to thank you for your hard work, for this dynamism you bring into our relationship, and I would like to wish all of you Merry Christmas and all of us everything best in the new year. Thank you.
Ďakujem, pán komisár. And before giving the floor to Madam Minister Beer for the Council, please, colleagues, try to be quieter so Madam Minister can actually speak and we can hear her. So, the floor is yours.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, I very much agree with what was said by President of the Commission, von der Leyen. In the reality of today's world, this has to be Europe's independence moment. And therefore, we have to make Europe stronger and capable of deciding our own future. I also noted from today's discussion a wide agreement to this, like Mr. Sebastian Bucalo from EPP, who has a New Year's resolution for all of us to be even more European in 2026. For Europe to be a strong global actor, we need to bring down burdens. And therefore, I do not understand, nor do I agree with those of the parliamentarians who today said that simplification and deregulation is a policy for Trump. It is a policy that highly needed, removes burdens for our European companies, and makes us able to compete. I am proud that the Danish presidency the last 6 months have worked hard to make Europe stronger when it comes to our security and defense, and when it comes to our competitiveness and green transition. And therefore, I am proud that we have now reached 3 agreements on the omnibus and a climate target for 2040. And then lastly, maybe this is a little bit out of procedure, but in such case, my apologies, President. This is my last day in the plenary during the Danish presidency, and I want to take the opportunity of a full plenary and thank you, all of you, for such a good cooperation and for all the results we made together. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and indeed it was a pleasure working with the Danish presidency, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you too. And thank you, colleagues, for really honoring the Minister. And this concludes the debate, and we'll just do a bit of a switch and we'll move to the vote.
Bene, ben ritrovati.